The man slept soundly, drooling profusely. He must have been dreaming of his house and children, or something like that. Suddenly, a young, beautiful woman with legs that went up to her armpits came looking for him. But what did she see that caused her to scream so terribly? Let's watch this movie together to find out, guys. The scene takes place at Hankook Law University. Students are participating in a mock trial for practical experience. They're assigned roles as judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and defendants, the whole shebang. They're trying a murder case, suspected poisoning. The arguments and proceedings are just like a real trial. Around them, leading professors and lecturers observe their outstanding students. The trial reaches a climax, then a 30-minute break is called. Everyone takes a breather to regain their energy before resuming the intense debate. Time passes, and the trial reconvenes. The beautiful, makeup-loving woman, acting as a court bailiff, is tasked with summoning Professor Seo to continue the proceedings. Upon arriving, she's terrified to find him motionless in his chair, foaming at the mouth. At first, she thinks he's just asleep and drooling, but this is way too much. He's clearly dead, guys. Soon, Hankook University is in an uproar. Police quickly arrive at the scene to investigate the professor's death. Prosecutor Jong-hoon also appears. He's a former professor at Hankook Law University. Jong-hoon carefully and meticulously examines the room. He discovers a box of blood glucose test strips in Professor Seo's office. The police suggest it might be suicide, citing a note found in the victim's pocket. "I'm so tired of this life. Let me go peacefully." Jong-hoon immediately objects. He argues that no one about to commit suicide would bother buying blood glucose test strips. Jong-hoon reflects on past events. The scene shifts to a criminal law class taught by Jong-hoon. He poses a question about an adultery case. The class is silent until he calls on Kang Sol, a bob-haired student. Han, a classmate, tries to help her out by answering instead. Thinking she's escaped, the next question is directed at Kang Sol. Her hands tremble, and she stammers as the professor presses her with increasingly technical legal questions, stuff nobody would randomly remember. A short-haired girl sitting beside her remains calm and confident in answering each question. After struggling to keep up, Kang Sol becomes nauseous and rushes out. Professor Jong-hoon follows, reminding her of her initial motivation for taking the class. It turns out Kang Sol was previously convicted of assault for trying to save someone. She hired numerous lawyers but ultimately had to settle and pay a large sum. Feeling the injustice of the law, Kang Sol is determined to become a skilled lawyer. Meanwhile, a news report highlights Lee Man-ho, a recently released sex offender who had been imprisoned for child molestation, sparking public outrage and concern about potential recidivism. Professor Jong-hoon continues his criminal law lecture, this time focusing on Professor Seo's bribery case. The court had acquitted Professor Seo, deeming the payment a gift from a benefactor, not a bribe. Jong-hoon, however, remains bitter about the acquittal and uses the opportunity to discuss it in class. These two professors seem to have a strained relationship. Back to the present, police review security footage, but find no suspicious individuals entering Professor Seo's office. A large media presence gathers outside the university. The president and university administration hold an emergency meeting, agreeing to withhold information until the police investigation concludes. Most students show little interest in Professor Seo's death, except for Kang Sol, who seems overly inquisitive. The police begin to investigate the recently released sex offender, Lee Man-ho. The next day, Lee Man-ho, the released sex offender, tracked down Professor Kim at Hankook Law University. Professor Kim, a former judge, had sentenced him to 11 years in prison. Despite Lee Man-ho's claims of intoxication and lack of awareness during the crime, he arrived to taunt her and even demand compensation for his time served. Professor Kim, who was pregnant, became so enraged that she started bleeding. A student, infuriated by Lee Man-ho's behavior, almost punched him, but Jong-hoon arrived in time to prevent a physical altercation. Professor Kim was rushed to the hospital. Days later, rumors circulated that Professor Seo's death was due to a drug overdose. While students were staging a mock trial in class, police unexpectedly arrived, announcing the discovery of suspicious footprints at the crime scene, possibly male or female high heels. In other words, the students became suspects. The police concluded that Professor Seo died from a drug overdose, poisoned by methamphetamine mixed into sugar and slipped into his drink. After analysis, the police shockingly arrested Jong-hoon, suspecting him of Professor Seo's murder. Unbelievable. The students were stunned to see their professor handcuffed and taken away. A flashback revealed Kang Sol as a high schooler, defending her older sister by fighting another girl. Unfortunately, that girl was well connected. To avoid juvenile detention, Kang Sol had to settle the case. The lawyer who helped her was none other than prosecutor Jong-hoon. Back in the present, Jong-hoon was taken to the police station for questioning, surrounded by hundreds of reporters taking photos and reporting the news. They asked if he'd acted alone or had accomplices. Back at the university, students were individually questioned. Entering the interrogation room, the detective got straight to the point. They'd found Jong-hoon's fingerprints on both the cup and the drug packet. The motive, they claimed, stemmed from a conflict between the two stemming from the Professor Seo bribery case when they were both prosecutors. Jong-hoon argued that if he'd committed murder, he wouldn't have been so foolish as to leave fingerprints. But the law operates on concrete evidence. Unable to refute the evidence immediately, Jong-hoon invoked his right to remain silent. Another detective, an old friend of Jong-hoon's, urged him to unlock his phone to assist the investigation. Further incriminating evidence arrived: hair found under the victim's fingernails, identified as Jong-hoon's DNA. At the university, students were buzzing, divided into those who believed Jong-hoon was the culprit and those who defended him. While he was strict in class, he wasn't a murderer, argued some. The university administration canceled all of Jong-hoon's classes, despite Professor Kim's pleas. The old man at the copy shop, who'd received a pair of shoes from Jong-hoon as a gift, now found those shoes were crucial evidence. Unfortunately, he'd lost them due to a foot injury. The police obtained a search warrant, forcing Jong-hoon to unlock his phone. They found a video showing a car's license plate number. A further revelation emerged. Years earlier, Lee Man-ho, after committing a child sexual assault, witnessed a car accident where a boy was killed. That car belonged to Professor Seo, explaining why he tried to cover it up all those years. Professor Kim visited Jong-hoon in jail, offering to be his defense attorney, but he refused, concerned only with the upcoming exam he'd prepared for his students. Because of the charges against him and the possibility of dismissal, Professor Dung created a different exam for the midterm criminal law exam. Exam day arrived, and students sweated profusely as they received their papers. Han, a male student, cried while taking the exam, perhaps due to the difficulty, or maybe a recent breakup. Jokes aside, Han seemed to harbor many secrets. At the police station, Lee Man-ho was interrogated alongside Jong-hoon. He felt smug, believing his ankle monitor provided him with an alibi in Professor Seo's case. Jong-hoon asked him an unrelated question, prompting Lee Man-ho to finally reveal the truth. He'd committed the child sexual assault while sober, and a boy witnessed it all. Terrified, the boy ran into the street and was hit by Professor Seo's car. Seo then paid off Lee Man-ho to keep quiet in exchange for help reducing his sentence, claiming he'd been drunk during the crime. Midterms were over, and students were huddled together comparing answers and reminiscing. The conversation turned to a past incident where Han, a male student, had accused Professor Seo of bribery. This had enraged the headmistress, who demanded severe punishment. However, the truth was that Han and Professor Seo were uncle and nephew. Later, Han confided in Kang Sol, revealing his familial relationship with Professor Seo. Kang Sol urged him to drop the accusation, warning him of the headmistress's wrath. Back in the present, Jong-hoon, despite being imprisoned, was calmly grading the exams. He was particularly impressed with Han's paper. That evening, Professor Seo's wife sought out Han. Their relationship was such that Han was the heir to his estate. She forcefully demanded he renounce his inheritance before she left Korea, revealing a cold, unloving nature towards her deceased husband. The next morning, Jong-hoon was brought before the chief prosecutor, with his lawyer, Park, observing. The prosecutor stated that overwhelming evidence existed against him, regardless of his plea. Meanwhile, Jong-hoon continued grading exams. While at the university, Headmistress Oh faced pressure from a committee member to fire Jong-hoon. She confided in her uncle, the copy shop owner, and invited him to visit young Jong-hoon. Initially perceived as antagonistic, she was actually acting to protect her students. The news broke the following day. Jong-hoon was named the murderer of Professor Seo. The motive: years of resentment stemming from the bribery case and a hit-and-run accident caused by Professor Seo. Frustrated with the legal system, Jong-hoon had taken matters into his own hands. He was taken to the crime scene to reenact the crime. During a 30-minute break, Professor Seo experienced dizziness due to low blood sugar. He reached for drugs in his coffee to alleviate the headache. Jong-hoon intervened, disposing of the drugs in the restroom, explaining his fingerprints on the evidence. However, a broken piece of glass on the stairs suggested Professor Seo might have been pushed. Jong-hoon realized Han could be the real killer. A flashback surfaced. Years earlier, Han and Kang Sol had a chance meeting at a bookstore, sparking a friendship and a shared ambition to attend Hankook Law University. At that time, Professor Seo's bribery scandal was a major news story, and Han closely followed the case. Returning to the present, the police were fixated on Jong-hoon spiking Professor Seo's coffee. The truth was he'd added sugar to help with his hypoglycemia, but no sugar packet was found at the scene. The truth gradually unfolded. On the day of the murder, Jong-hoon received a video showing Professor Seo's car's license plate from the hit and run years ago. The sender, Han. This fueled Jong-hoon's suspicion of Han's involvement. He requested a second autopsy to determine if Professor Seo suffered any head trauma from the fall. Furthermore, Professor Seo's glasses had been switched with an older pair. The old glasses were broken at the scene of the fall. The police worried about the feasibility of a second autopsy, especially considering Jong-hoon's speculation. Professor Seo's wife, frustrated by her inability to convince Han to renounce his inheritance, agreed to the second autopsy to uncover the truth. Students buzzed with speculation, unable to comprehend how Seo could love Han so much yet Han could kill his uncle. Kim, anxious about her unjustly accused colleague, tried to convince the vice principal to act as his lawyer, but he refused due to his jealousy of Jong-hoon. Han, silent amidst Jong-hoon's accusations, hid in a corner, lost in reflection. Months earlier, upon discovering the video of his uncle's car, he'd confronted Professor Seo about the hit and run. His reverie was interrupted by the appearance of the deranged Lee Man-ho, who casually mentioned that, as Professor Seo's driver, he knew the professor always carried a spare pair of glasses in his car. The bespectacled young man returned to his room and suddenly remembered something. On the day Professor Seo died, Han was the first to arrive on the scene. He recalled seeing a glasses case fall from Han's pocket. That same glasses case was now hidden under his bed. Professor Seo's wife visited Jong-hoon in prison. She seemed determined to put her nephew, Han, behind bars. She claimed their uncle-nephew relationship had been strained since the bribery scandal. Later, Lawyer Park and two students also visited Jong-hoon. Jae-ho, the bespectacled student, brought crucial evidence: Professor Seo's broken glasses. Suspecting Han, the police launched an investigation at the university. Midterm exam results were released, revealing Kang Sol near the bottom of the class, as usual. At the courthouse, the chief prosecutor told Jong-hoon the outcome was unlikely to change. Regardless of the second autopsy results, he would still be prosecuted because they were searching for Jong-hoon's laptop, which contained crucial evidence and had been stolen. Both the sugar packet and the laptop were crucial evidence, but they had vanished. The police searched Han's room but found nothing useful. They even went to his class to gather more information, but the law students were uncooperative and wary of the police. In prison, Jong-hoon was constantly harassed and humiliated by other inmates. One day, while showering, he was attacked by a prisoner wielding a knife. The attacker may have been someone Jong-hoon had previously sent to prison, seeking revenge. Jong-hoon suffered significant blood loss and was rushed to the hospital. Lee Man-ho, the pervert, was up to his old tricks, stalking a young girl named Byul near his home. She was Kang Sol's younger sister, whom she deeply cherished. Worried about their safety, Kang Sol visited them, giving Byul pepper spray for self-defense before leaving. Kim and Han rushed to the hospital upon hearing the news. The doctor informed them that Jong-hoon had lost a lot of blood and was in critical condition. His rare blood type made finding a match extremely difficult. While Jong-hoon's life hung in the balance, Professor Seo's body underwent a brain autopsy. Incredibly, Lee Man-ho, the pervert, shared a rare blood type with Jong-hoon. He went to the hospital and called Han. If Jong-hoon dies and remains silent forever, wouldn't you, Han, be the biggest beneficiary? So, should I give him blood or not? Han calmly replied. Then don't give him blood. Jong-hoon's condition worsened. Doctors had to use a defibrillator as he showed signs of cardiac arrest. Kang Sol, upon receiving the news, raced to find her sister. Her sister also had the rare blood type. Han, learning of this, tried to stop Kang Sol. Jong-hoon was saved by Lee Man-ho's blood. During his call with Han, Lee had demanded half the inheritance in exchange for blood. Yet, having saved Jong-hoon, the deal seemed to have fallen through. What would Jong-hoon think when he woke up and learned he was saved by Lee Man-ho? The next day, Jong-hoon woke up and immediately checked the autopsy report. Indeed, Professor Seo had a brain hematoma due to trauma. This suggested two possible causes of death: drug overdose and cerebral hemorrhage. The forensic pathologist who conducted the first autopsy had mysteriously left for Canada with his family, arousing suspicion. And how could that doctor have missed the hematoma? After learning the autopsy results, Professor Seo's wife immediately went to the university. She found her precious nephew and berated him. When Kang Sol tried to intervene, the wife threatened to call the police, continuing to vehemently accuse Han of murder. At the hospital, the chief prosecutor visited Jong-hoon and told him he could apply for bail. Jong-hoon responded, "If I'm released, it has to be a full release, not temporary bail." The autopsy results confirmed his suspicions. The police lacked sufficient evidence to detain him further. Han, back at the university, recalled his conversation with his uncle in the mock courtroom. He'd urged his uncle to confess, mentioning that he'd already sent the hit-and-run video to Jong-hoon. The uncle he'd respected and admired was a hit-and-run driver who had fled the scene. His idol had crumbled. The next day, Jong-hoon was released from detention. In front of reporters, he announced he would sue the chief prosecutor for disclosing details of the case before the truth was revealed, claiming it damaged his reputation. Upon release, he immediately went to his classroom. The students' faces paled at the sight of Professor Jong-hoon's return. The Grim Reaper of a professor was back. Kang Sol, as usual, faced his challenging legal questions. Han, fresh from questioning by the prosecutor, returned. Jong-hoon posed a question to his students, asking them to analyze who the killer was. One suspect was suspected of poisoning, the other of pushing Professor Seo down the stairs. A masterclass in applying theory to practice. Later, teacher and student stood beneath the scales of justice and the statue of Lady Justice. Han confessed the events of that day. He'd idolized his uncle since childhood. Learning about his uncle's bribery and the hit and run shattered his image. He'd threatened his uncle, "Confess, or I'll call the police." While they were on the phone, Professor Seo slipped and fell. He managed to get back to his room, locked the door, and claimed he was fine. Han deeply regretted not taking him to the hospital to check his injuries. A mock trial ensued, dividing the class into two sides. Kang Sol, sympathetic to Han, argued for his innocence. Jai-ho, however, presented the glasses case evidence from the dormitory, siding with Jong-hoon. It turned out Han intentionally withheld the truth to protect his teacher. The more suspicion fell on Han, the less likely the police could keep Jong-hoon in custody. Han confessed only after Jong-hoon was released. The police and prosecutor were furious at being manipulated by a second-year student. Days later, criminal law midterm results were released. Surprisingly, Kang Sol, usually at the bottom of the class, scored the highest. Kang Sol B, with her short hair, received a lower score than her roommate, prompting her mother to storm the school and berate her. The pressure of exams, compounded by her mother's reaction, was almost unbearable. The mother then boldly confronted the headmistress, demanding to know why a criminal was allowed to take and even grade the exam. She declared with a haughty air, "I'm 30 years old, and I've never seen anything like this. Unbelievable." After struggling to convince her classmates that her high score was deserved, Kang Sol unexpectedly encountered the second autopsy doctor on her way home. She questioned him about the disappearance of the first pathologist and the missed hematoma, suspecting foul play aimed at framing Yong-an. The two doctors appeared shifty and hurried away to avoid the prosecutor. Following Jong-hoon's lawsuit for disclosing case details, the prosecutor concocted a new scheme, framing Jong-hoon and Han as accomplices in Professor Seo's murder. This led to Jong-hoon's dismissal and Han's temporary suspension. They both visited Professor Seo's wife, who accused them of collusion. However, the truth was she'd paid the forensic pathologist to lie about the cerebral hemorrhage to frame Han. Yang An had evidence, and Kang Sol had already visited the doctor to uncover the truth. Han was cleared of suspicion, but Jong Hoon remained entangled in legal troubles. Just then, Jong Hoon discovered a lead about the missing laptop. His laptop contained only documents about student plagiarism, implicating Kang Sol-bi. She had stolen it while he was in detention. The vice principal had been teaching his classes. Disliking students using laptops in class, he'd confiscated Kang Sol-bi's machine. Incredibly, the vice principal was holding Jong Hoon's laptop. Checking his email, Jong Hoon saw "read notifications," meaning someone had accessed his email using his laptop. The scene shifted to the women's dormitory. Kang Sol-bi's mother, for once, pressured her daughter to move. Upset by her daughter's low score, she blamed her roommate, though the roommate was innocent. Furious, she took her daughter home. En route, Kang Sol-bi revealed that Jong Hoon wasn't the murderer. She knew about the laptop in the vice principal's possession and the sugar packet, but hadn't told the police, allowing Yang to remain a suspect. Kang Sol-bi proved to be an antagonistic character, even undergoing psychological treatment, likely due to her ambitious mother's constant pressure regarding her academic achievements. The next day, the mother waited for her daughter at school and confronted Yang An. Jong Hoon accused Kang Sol-bi of plagiarism and copyright infringement. The mother criticized him, saying he was a criminal unfit to teach or grade exams. She boasted about her daughter's academic achievements and presented evidence refuting the plagiarism accusations, claiming any unintentional infringement was due to ignorance. It turned out that the essay was originally co-authored by Professor Seo and Kang Sol-bi. Professor Seo published it first, and Kang Sol-bi later, resulting in the plagiarism claim. Now, the mother stubbornly tried to rewrite the narrative, taking advantage of Professor Seo's death to avoid verification. Kang Sol-bi then approached her father, the vice principal, about Yang An's laptop. He seemed intent on keeping Yang An as a suspect, hence the concealment. She also mentioned the sugar packet in his possession, threatening to expose the entire affair. The scene shifted to the Hankook Law University president's office. A committee member repeatedly pressured the president to fire Yang An, citing public opinion painting the law school as harboring a murderer. Even though he hadn't been indicted, his status as a suspect disqualified him from teaching. Their mutual dislike only escalated during this encounter. The committee member and the prosecutor, both harboring grievances, exchanged barbed remarks, scheduling a court meeting. Han approached Yang An, giving him a packet resembling a sugar packet. He'd likely noticed Kang Sol-bi's actions and retrieved it from the trash. Kang Sol's life at home was under her mother's strict surveillance and control. Even her private phone calls, including conversations with Han, were intercepted and read by her mother. Enraged and unable to bear it any longer, Kang Sol packed her bags and demanded to move out. Whenever her daughter did something her mother disapproved of, the mother would resort to the dramatic ploy of threatening to drink pesticide. One pill was enough to be lethal, but she would theatrically hold up the entire bottle, truly terrifying. Unlike previous attempts, this time, her daughter dared her to swallow it. Clearly, the mother was only bluffing. Her father, returning home to witness this scene, was utterly helpless. He suggested, maybe we should hand over the laptop and tell the truth, but Kang Sol adamantly refused. She felt she had gone too far to turn back. Confessing now would be incredibly embarrassing. The next day, during Professor Kim's civil law class, she again mentioned Kang Sol-bi's plagiarism case to illustrate her lecture. Needless to say, Kang Sol-bi's rebuttal was fierce and uncompromising. Professor Jong Hoon visited Lawyer Park to inquire about the assailant who stabbed him. The assailant maintained that it was due to personal animosity, denying any involvement of others. Taking the opportunity, Professor Jong Hoon brought Lawyer Park back to meet with his students. They discussed Professor Yang's case, who was suspected of murder. During the discussion, Jong Hoon received an urgent message from the vice principal, asking him to retrieve a laptop. The vice principal began to recount the events of that day. I met Professor Seo. He was experiencing a dizzy spell and was about to put drugs into his coffee. Suddenly, the vice principal arrived, carrying a packet of sugar. Professor Seo said he wouldn't let Kang Sol-bi's plagiarism go unpunished, especially since she lied about writing it back in middle school. Even though the vice principal's wife and daughter had previously pleaded with him privately, if the truth were revealed, Kang Sol's future as a judge would be over. While Professor Seo stepped out to answer a phone call, the vice principal saw the drugs on the table and poured the entire packet into the coffee to kill him. Only then would his daughter live in peace. At this point, I'm completely confused. I don't know how many people are involved or who the real killer of Professor Seo is. Young Bon, on her way home from school, received a call from Kang Sol. Her sister repeatedly warned, "Be careful of the pervert Lee who lives nearby." No sooner had she mentioned him than he appeared before Bon. Seeing his lecherous expression, she sprayed him with pepper spray and ran away, forgetting her phone. I suspect this guy was planning another act of child molestation. Returning to the vice principal's confession, he was drinking alcohol on school grounds. Perhaps under the influence, he felt emboldened to confess to hiding the sugar packet and the laptop. Professor Jong-hoon, however, was reluctant to discuss the matter while he was intoxicated. Kang Sol, while at school, received a call from the police. They showed her sister's phone and demanded she not spread images of the criminal. It turned out Lee Man-ho had taken the phone to the police station, claiming to be a victim. He mentioned her sister, Kang Dan, and wanted to meet her to discuss something. I wonder what his real intentions are. Kang Sol returned home, fearing Lee Man-ho might watch her house, so she carefully covered the windows with newspaper, worried about her and her sister's safety. Han stayed for a long time to observe Lee Man-ho's house. They both attended Hankook University. On the way, they encountered Yi Seul, the class hot girl. She seemed to be arguing with her boyfriend. He appeared to be a stereotypical bad boy. After a restless night, Professor Yan seemed to have some answers in mind. The next morning, Kang Sol-bi visited him. She asked him to keep her secret about being the vice principal's daughter, fearing that students would accuse her of receiving preferential treatment in grades. Later, her father visited Professor Jong-hoon. The vice principal said he would confess everything by the end of the week, but Jong-hoon replied that even a confession wouldn't prove his innocence, because mere words without evidence are insufficient, and the only fingerprints at the crime scene belong to Jong-hoon. The prosecution is trying to railroad him into prison, making it difficult to overturn the situation. He left, telling the vice principal to attend his trial. The vice principal returned home and took down the family photo. He said, "Take your daughter to a psychologist. She's not fit to be a Supreme Court judge." His wife had high expectations for him to become a judge, but it didn't happen. Now she's doing anything to ensure her daughter's path to becoming a judge. The first trial of Professor Yang began. The prosecutor indicted Jong-hoon for the murder of Professor Seo and requested his arrest. However, Jong-hoon rejected the indictment. The vice principal was also called as a witness. Previously, he testified that he didn't see any sugar packet at the scene. Now he admitted to lying. He saw the sugar packet, it was his, and he had brought it to the professor's office. As the vice principal confessed to being Professor Seo's murderer, Kang Sol-bi's voice interrupted. It turned out that Jong-hoon had been calling Kang Sol-bi on speakerphone. She was rushing to the courthouse. Both father and daughter had misconstrued each other's actions. The father thought his daughter committed the murder, and vice versa. This led to the vice principal taking the fall to save his daughter. The prosecutor said, since the vice principal lied before, his current testimony needs verification. We can't simply believe him. We need to find a way to prove Jong-hoon guilty for him to confess. The first trial was temporarily adjourned. Kang Sol-bi thanked Professor Yang. Without him, the misunderstanding between her and her father wouldn't have been resolved, and she wouldn't have been able to stop her father from confessing to murder in court. Back at school, students gossiped and pointed fingers at Kang Sol-bi as the vice principal's daughter. Professor Jong-hoon advised the vice principal to withdraw his resignation. He didn't kill Professor Seo. He intended to poison him, but his conscience got the better of him, and he disposed of the poisoned drink. Kang Sol told Han about encountering the pervert Lee at the courthouse. Lee said he wanted to see her sister, Kang Dan, to inquire about his son. But Kang Dan had left home and hadn't contacted her family for many years. Han also gave Kang Sol the book she had sold him years ago. A letter from Kang Dan to Professor Yang was accidentally tucked inside. Kang Sol immediately took it to her professor. Coincidentally, Kang Dan called Jong-hoon at that moment. The story goes back 4 years. People were using the sauna naked, while Jong-hoon wore a full suit to keep cool. A council member who was close to Professor Seo was using various means to win the election. Kang Dan discovered and reported his wrongdoings. He tried to bring Jong-hoon to his side for easy manipulation, but he didn't expect Jong-hoon to be so stubborn. Back in the present, Kang Sol heard her sister's voice and quickly grabbed the phone. The call ended abruptly. Jong-hoon tried repeatedly to call back but failed. He said, "I might have met Kang Sol's sister at the Criminal Law Forum last year." Han and Jae-ho, the bespectacled duo, had a conversation. Jae-ho revealed that his father was the CEO of a toy company. Years ago, he committed suicide by self-immolation in his office during an investigation. The person who publicly indicted Jae-ho's father was the deceased Professor Seo. Therefore, Jae-ho had always disliked the professor. Do-ho's father's death anniversary coincided with Professor Seo's death. Could the bespectacled boy be the killer? Han expressed his desire to review the materials Jae-ho had collected from the case. In the USB drive Jae-ho gave him, there was a video of Professor Seo using drugs. There was also an audio recording. "You're not my nephew, you're my son. I love you so much." Could this be the real relationship between Han and Professor Seo? The letter Kang Dan wrote to Professor Yang contained an apology for betraying justice and being blinded by money. Did Kang Dan do something wrong in the past that led to her disappearance? Kang Sol put aside many questions about her sister's situation to focus on studying for her upcoming final exams. Hot girl Yi Seul unexpectedly arrived, asking to share a room to avoid feeling lonely. Kang Sol, who considered Yi Seul like a sister, didn't refuse. Later, she went to Yi Seul's room to sleep. Suddenly, the bad boy unexpectedly opened the door, climbed onto the bed, and hugged Kang Sol. Terrified, she screamed, and the bad boy was caught and beaten up by Han. He had gained entry because Yi Seul had given him her student ID. To avoid a scandal, both sides agreed to let the matter drop. Kang Sol had a bad feeling about the bad boy. Han even made him write a statement of self-criticism. The next day, Jong-hoon went to the court and learned that Prosecutor Jin had been acquitted. There wasn't enough evidence to prove he leaked information about the case as Jong-hoon claimed. To file charges, they needed to find the reporter who could testify to Jin leaking information. There, Professor Yang met Lee Man-ho, who offered a statement. Yang told him to stop bothering his students. Lee Man-ho said he only wanted to see Kang Dan about something. Feeling guilty about his daughter's plagiarism, the vice principal decided to submit his resignation, but it was rejected by the principal. She told him to stay and prepare an upcoming lecture with the council member. Kang Sol questioned Seung-yi about Professor Yang's laptop, suspecting he was hiding something. The council member's lecture was grand. He repeatedly mentioned Jong-hoon as the murderer at Hankook Law University, then boasted about the laws he created. When Jong-hoon heard enough, he insulted the council member and left. The aggressive bad boy turned out to be the council member's son. Seeing his father humiliated, he confronted Professor Yang. Yi Seul intervened, reminding him that he would be studying there next year and should avoid causing trouble. He stepped on her foot and behaved like a maniac. Kang Sol intervened to help Yi Seul. The bad boy said something that made Kang Sol suspicious. She rushed back to check and found a hidden camera in Yi Seul's room. The second trial for Professor Seo's murder began. Kang Sol testified, stating that Jong-hoon wasn't the murderer. Prosecutor Jin brought up a past incident where Kang Sol was sent to a juvenile detention center for fighting, and Jong-hoon was her lawyer. Therefore, her testimony wasn't considered very reliable. Next, Jae-ho testified. Professor Yang directly questioned him about why he had given him the broken glasses. Jae-ho confessed that he wanted Yang to help him get revenge on his father. His father, a toy company CEO, was accused of using cancer-causing materials in his toys. Unable to bear the public pressure, he committed suicide, and Jae-ho resented Professor Seo for accusing his father. This made Jae-ho a more suspicious figure in Professor Seo's death. Jae-ho recalled that it was his father's death anniversary, so he visited Professor Seo, witnessed him using drugs, and was mistaken for a student. During the time of Professor Seo's death, Jong-hoon was in his own office, as confirmed by Seung-yi. He continued his testimony, saying that when he arrived, Professor Seo was heavily intoxicated and near death. It was likely a suicide. If someone had poisoned him, he would have told Jae-ho before dying. After Jae-ho's testimony, the last witness was the pervert Lee, Professor Seo's personal driver. He had driven the professor to school that day and then returned home. His ankle monitor provided him with an alibi. Han waited for Jai-ho outside the courtroom. He played the recording he made when he followed the two reporters into the restroom. The recording revealed that years ago, it was Prosecutor Jin who had killed Han's father. He leaked information about the case, causing a media frenzy that led to the suicide. Han advised Jai-ho to think carefully before acting, as the statute of limitations for the case was about to expire in 5 years. Furthermore, the recording was illegally obtained, making it difficult to overturn Prosecutor Jin's actions. The second trial ended. Before leaving, the prosecutor revealed that in the third trial, he would present a witness to Professor Seo's death. However, to protect the witness's life, he wouldn't reveal their identity. Jong-hoon remained calm. If the prosecutor had a witness, he would find one to prove his alibi. Han and Jai-ho met the two reporters and played them the recording. Jai-ho said he would sue Prosecutor Jin for publicly accusing his father. The reporters scoffed, knowing that the recording was illegal, but they hadn't anticipated that Jai-ho had also recorded their conversation, making it legal evidence. They were outwitted. The witness the prosecutor mentioned was Yi Seul. The council member and prosecutor had conspired to imprison Jong-hoon. Yi Seul's boyfriend, the council member's son, wanted to destroy Jong-hoon on his father's orders and wanted Yi Seul to be a false witness. He made sweet promises, saying he would marry her next year and professed his love. Yi Seul, distraught, sought Han's advice, but before she could speak, her boyfriend sent her an intimate video to threaten her. Han left, leaving Yi Seul with the statement of self-criticism her boyfriend had written, promising not to hit her again. The next day, the principal met with Jong-hoon. The council member wanted him to apologize for humiliating him in front of students during the lecture. Otherwise, he would continue to make things difficult for him in the next trial. Naturally, Jong-hoon refused. Kang Sol was focused on her studies and ignored the ongoing events. Professor Kim was busy preparing exam papers for her students. Jong-hoon sought Kim out to discuss some aspects of the trial. Unbeknownst to Kim, her computer was being remotely controlled by Seung-yi, who was copying the exam papers she had just made. After talking with Jong-hoon, Kim suspected Seung-yi of giving Young's laptop to the vice principal. She confronted Seung-yi. That day, Seung-yi entered the room and opened Young's laptop. Before he could do anything, Jong-hoon returned. Seung-yi hid in a nearby wooden cabinet. Unfortunately, Jai-ho called him, almost revealing his presence to Yang. The scene shifts to an apartment building. That night, the pervert Lee Man-ho was visited by Jong-hoon, who offered him a deal, help him testify in court. Jong-hoon desperately wanted to find Kang Dan to ask about his son, the child he cruelly abandoned at an orphanage. Kang Dan had worked there for a while, and the boy only kept in touch with him. In exchange for helping Jong-hoon testify, he would receive Kang Dan's phone number. The final law exam arrived. Kang Sol pulled all-nighters studying, working so hard that she ended up having a nosebleed and fainting while completing the exam. She was rushed to the hospital. The third trial for Professor Seo's murder officially began. Yi Seul had rehearsed her false testimony and crocodile tears. Her trap boy boyfriend looked smug. Yi Seul, still feeling uneasy, went to the restroom before the trial. She overheard a conversation between Miss Kim and Kang Sol, discovering that Miss Kim knew about Yi Seul's false testimony but hadn't stopped her. This increased Yi Seul's guilt. Before the judge and prosecutor, Yi Seul testified that she had witnessed Jong-hoon putting drugs in Professor Seo's drink. She hadn't revealed this earlier because Jong-hoon had threatened her life. The opposing side rejoiced at her testimony. But it wasn't over yet. Yi Seul suddenly changed her testimony, driven by guilt. She confessed that her boyfriend had sent her threatening videos, forcing her to give false testimony. She bowed her head and apologized to everyone. The truth was, Jong-hoon hadn't put drugs in Professor Seo's drink. The third trial ended, awaiting the judge's verdict. Her vicious boyfriend, enraged that Yi Seul had betrayed him, tracked her down. He assaulted her and tried to upload their sex tape online, intending to ruin her life and career. He would only face a suspended sentence for distributing the video. Terrified, Yi Seul accidentally caused him to fall and hit his head, resulting in severe bleeding. His survival was uncertain. She tried to call Kang Sol for help. Jong-hoon arrived and witnessed everything. He quickly called an ambulance, taking both Yi Seul and her boyfriend to the hospital. Han and Kang Sol also arrived to assist. The trap boy required emergency brain surgery. Upon hearing that his beloved son was hospitalized, the councilman went wild and wanted to attack Yi Seul, even though she was in shock. The police wanted to detain Yi Seul for questioning at the councilman's order. However, Jong-hoon intervened, stating that she was a victim and that the councilman's son intended to distribute the video. Escalating the matter would be detrimental to both sides. Miss Kim visited her student in the hospital and advised Yi Seul to file a sexual assault complaint. Although she hated her ex-boyfriend, Yi Seul still couldn't bring herself to do it. The doctor reported that the councilman's son was out of danger, but his recovery was uncertain. At the university, students began the second semester exams. Miss Kim met with Jong-hoon, revealing that she had long known that Seung had been hacking into her laptop to steal exam questions, explaining his consistently high scores. On the night of the murder, Seung also attempted to sneak into Jong-hoon's room to steal exam papers from his laptop. If Seung testified as an alibi witness for Jong-hoon, it would be very beneficial. The fourth trial for Professor Seo's murder began. Yi Seul's previous testimony had been advantageous to Jong-hoon, but because she had unintentionally injured her boyfriend, prosecutor Jin argued that her testimony was unreliable. The judge asked if Jong-hoon had booked a flight to America on the night of the murder, implying an attempt to flee after committing the crime. Jong-hoon honestly replied that he wanted to find someone named Kang Dan. That girl, formerly working on the councilman's election campaign, discovered that the old councilman spread false information about his opponent to compete for votes. The prosecutor immediately covered up the incident by presenting additional unfavorable evidence against Jong-hoon Seung. Heeding Kim's advice, he was on his way to the court to testify for his teacher, Jong-hoon, when his wife suddenly called him to the hospital urgently. She wanted to inform him of her pregnancy and instructed him to study law well for a bright future. Seung encountered Yi Seul, also at the hospital, there to apologize. The trap boy, now awake but paralyzed from the waist down, couldn't walk. Serves him right. Jun, wanting to avoid worrying his pregnant wife, selfishly decided not to testify. Kang Sol-bi, the short-haired girl, offered to be a witness instead, on the condition that Jong-hoon wouldn't suspect her of plagiarism anymore. The fourth hearing temporarily concluded there. To find more evidence, Kang Sol and the male student Han met Yi Seul to inquire about her situation. The unfortunate girl was being sued for causing bodily harm to CH Boy. She tried to hire a lawyer, but no one dared to take the case. Understandably, who would dare to touch the councilman's precious son? Kang Sol later confronted the old councilman. She said her sister didn't betray anyone for money. Their stepfather was the one who accepted the dirty money that year. She also mentioned the councilman's son placing hidden cameras in Yi Seul's room. These words enraged the old councilman. He visited his son in the hospital and ordered his lawyers to twist the facts, to make it look like a premeditated murder. His son planned to delete the video and break up, but the girl attacked him, causing serious injuries. What a cunning and scheming old man. He then pressured the university president. If Jong-hoon apologized and resigned, he would consider settling with Yi Seul. Of course, he refused and even threatened the old man about the election fraud years ago. The kind Kim gathered her best students. They collectively researched documents to help clear Yi Seul. On the day of the trial for causing bodily harm, the councilman's son arrived, with a whole team of lawyers defending him. On Yi Seul's side, no lawyer was present. At the critical moment, Professor Yang entered like a savior. Jong-hoon requested a jury trial to ensure the defendant received the fairest judgment. The plaintiff's lawyers disagreed, arguing that Jong-hoon was involved and a suspect in the Professor Seo case. Furthermore, the law prohibited law school professors from acting as defense attorneys. The court, considering this a special case due to the victim being the son of the councilman, a prospective presidential candidate in South Korea, allowed Jong-hoon to act as defense counsel. The trial was temporarily adjourned for further deliberation by the judges. Kang Sol went home to visit her younger sister, Bon. The little girl said that while her sister was away, their mother and Kang Dan struggled because their stepfather was constantly drinking and gambling, squandering all their earnings. Professor Yang and Kim were also comforting Yi Seul. The girl felt guilty and didn't want to pursue the case further or make a bigger issue out of it. She also felt ashamed toward her family and friends. Jong-hoon was disappointed that his student gave up so easily. Han, in his spare time, visited the pervert, Lee Man-ho, to inquire about Professor Seo. Professor Seo had a habit of checking his blood sugar. But why was he meticulously checking his test strips before his death? Lee Man-ho said that the doctor told him his blood sugar was high recently, so he should test frequently for monitoring. His car also contained a notebook recording his daily blood sugar levels. Kang Sol, recently troubled by many worries, sought solace in alcohol. The academic plagiarism incident, followed by her sister's troubles, left her with much to think about. Luckily, she had the male student, Han, to confide in and keep her company during this difficult time. The next day, Kang Sol-bi's plagiarism case, regarding her short-haired essay, was brought before the school board. She vehemently denied any wrongdoing, claiming that she possessed a natural talent and had written the essay since middle school. A classmate from her middle school, Jae-ho the Four-Eyed One, could vouch for this. After resolving the plagiarism matter, Professor Jong-hoon considered visiting the prison. Han offered to accompany him, not forgetting to bring the blood sugar logbook he had found. However, the pen Professor Seo used daily was missing. It turned out Jong-hoon went to the prison to visit the man who had nearly killed him. He still suspected someone was behind the attack, urging the man to kill him, but the assailant insisted it was a personal grudge. The two, teacher and student, encountered a suspicious individual entering the prison, seemingly manipulating the inmate's psychology. Jong-hoon suspected this person was sent by the murderer of Professor Seo. Unfortunately, they lost track of him after a short chase. Poor, pitiful Yi Seul visited the hospitalized assailant. Despite his condition, he remained arrogant, even spitting in Yi Seul's face and insulting her. She went to Professor Young, presenting evidence of her boyfriend's frequent beatings, assaults, and threats. However, she only wanted Professor Young to clear her name, not to press charges. Kang Sol also arrived, wanting to help Professor Young overthrow the commissioner and his son, partially as revenge for her sister. The next day, the final trial for Professor Seo's poisoning case took place. All students and teachers attended. Before the trial, Yi Seul was entrusted with a USB drive. The person who gave it to her lacked the courage to testify and asked her to submit the evidence to help Professor Young. However, as she got out of the car, a motorcyclist robbed her of this crucial evidence. Professor Seo's blood sugar logbook was presented. It showed a drop in his blood sugar level on the day of the incident, suggesting that Professor Young's claim of adding sugar to Professor Seo's water was plausible. Prosecutor Jin suggested the logbook could be forged. Jong-hoon called a witness, Professor Seo's close driver, Lee Man-ho, to testify to the logbook's authenticity. During a recess, the prosecutor made a deal with Lee Man-ho to prevent him from testifying. Professor Young then defended himself, stating that no murderer would leave such obvious fingerprints or footprints. It all seemed deliberately set up to frame him. Furthermore, Professor Seo always wore a pen, but it was missing from his body when his remains were discovered. His defense was so powerful that everyone was impressed. He produced the USB drive, stating it contained evidence sent by Seung. However, he would only open it and appeal if the court found him guilty. He implored the court for a fair judgment, setting an example for law students. After the trial, Yi Seul informed Kim that the USB drive Jong-hoon presented in court was a smokescreen, a diversion. The students returned to school, where the school president and the commissioner berated and cursed Yi Seul. The principal and other students defended her. After the trial, Jong-hoon drove off to an unknown location. He recalled the prison visit. The assailant seemed afraid of being discovered, secretly writing a phone number on his hand for Jong-hoon. After calling the number, he was directed to a cafe. There, he found only a black briefcase. At home, he found a shoe insole, a syringe box, and a pen items that seemed to belong to the deceased Professor Seo. Meanwhile, Lee Man-ho met with an anonymous person, who gave him a picture of the son he had been searching for. At the university, the students and Professor Kim continued their efforts in Yi Seul's case. The creep, that boy, still insisted that placing hidden cameras in his girlfriend's room was solely for her protection. Now, to clear Yi Seul's name, they had to prove he was lying, which was proving to be quite difficult. Han Jun HWI and another student were assigned to intern with Prosecutor Jin. Four Eyes Jae-ho, on the other hand, secured an internship at a law firm. Upon arrival, the firm's director recognized Jai Ho as the witness from the trial. After taking a phone call outside, the director told Jai Ho not to come back the next day, but promised him a position after passing the bar exam. His motive was clearly to manipulate Jai Ho into giving false testimony. The scene shifts to Prosecutor Jin's office. Unexpectedly, Seung showed up to confess. The prosecutor, feigning fairness, suggested Han Jun Hwi conduct the interrogation, but his true intention was to let the students tear each other apart. Han questioned Seung, "You've always hacked and spied on the professor's laptops to get exam questions, haven't you? And on the day of the murder, you were hiding in the closet, overhearing the conversation between Professor Yang and Professor Seo. Now, consumed by guilt, you don't want an innocent person to be blamed for the murder, so you've come to confess. If it weren't for Professor Seo's sudden death, you would have continued cheating on exams, wouldn't you?" Han's sharp questions left Seung gasping for air. Meanwhile, the other students had secured their internships. The two Kang Sols both chose to intern with Councilman Kang. The Kang Sol with straight hair, having no prior issues with the councilman, was accepted immediately. The other Kang Sol, however, was dismissed the moment she appeared. She then presented the councilman with a letter from Professor Kim, which contained a newly drafted law. Professor Kim had painstakingly prepared this as a last resort, should the councilman refuse the internship. Han Jun Hwi visited Professor Yang. He admitted to being too naive and letting Prosecutor Jin manipulate him into interrogating Seung first, planning to later feign comfort and sway Seung to his side. Professor Jong Hoon also showed Han the evidence in the black backpack, suggesting the possibility that the perpetrator had injected drugs directly into Professor Seo, rather than poisoning his drink as initially suspected. The next day was the public hearing for the councilman's son's assault case. Professor Kim advised Professor Jong Hoon to maintain a gentler demeanor, as the jury members preferred flattery over coldness. Before the trial, the councilman held a press conference to introduce his new bill. Actually, Professor Kim's using it as an opportunity to bring up the issue of parents neglecting child support to add depth to the bill. He even used Lee Man-ho, the pervert, as an example of a bad parent in his speech, attempting to sway public opinion in his son's favor. The jury selection process was underway. The potential jurors were thoroughly investigated and asked hypothetical questions to assess their judgment. Kang Sol's mother was also among them. Having someone on their side increased their chances of winning. After much effort, Kang Sol's mother secured a spot on the jury. The trial officially began. Yi Seul was accused of aggravated assault. The prosecution claimed she had been dating her boyfriend for 3 years, then cheated on him and was assaulted when he wanted to break up, leading to her actions. Professor Jong Hoon countered, arguing that it wasn't true. Yi Seul had been assaulted by her creepy boyfriend, who intentionally leaked her private videos online. Any injuries she inflicted were in self-defense. During a recess, the councilman, feeling smug, was unexpectedly attacked by Lee Man-ho. Professor Jong Hoon appeared, and instead of intervening, he encouraged Lee Man-ho, saying, "Choke him harder, put your other hand on him too." After enthusiastically cheering on Lee Man-ho's attack, Professor Jong Hoon even took out his phone to record it. Since Han couldn't find the professor anywhere, he went looking for him and chased the pervert Lee Man-ho to the emergency stairs. He ran so fast he lost a shoe. Han picked it up and estimated it to be a pretty close match to the shoe insole in the black backpack. When he held up Professor Seo's pen, Lee Man-ho reacted nervously. Han promised to see him again, next time at the police station. The trial continued, with the prosecution now targeting Han Jun Hwi, claiming he was the person Yi Seul had an affair with. Professor Jong Hoon presented photos of Yi Seul's injuries, showing bruises on her face, arms, and legs, evidence of prolonged abuse. Kang Sol's mother reacted empathetically, perhaps a bit too dramatically, raising suspicion from the prosecution. Seung's wife, a doctor, was called to testify, confirming that Yi Seul's injuries were consistent with repeated assaults. A video was shown of Yi Seul's reaction upon receiving the threatening video from her boyfriend. She looked panicked and afraid. The prosecution argued that such a reaction indicated guilt, implying she wouldn't be so startled if she hadn't been secretly filmed. The sly, squinty-eyed prosecutor continued to steer the narrative against the defendant, interrogating Han and persistently portraying him as having an affair with Yi Seul. Just as things were heating up, Kang Sol's mother feigned needing the restroom, prompting a recess. Han Jun HWI and Jai Ho grabbed lunch. Prosecutor Jin approached, warning Jai Ho against playing any dirty tricks, referring to Jai Ho's contact with the two reporters he'd previously leaked information to. Han tried to urge him to reinvestigate the perpetrator's shoe size and the injection mark on Professor Seo's abdomen, but the prosecutor ignored him. Jai Ho then received the video of Lee Man-ho attacking the councilman, sent by Professor Jong-hoon. In the restroom, Han ran into Seung, who gave him a phone, claiming it would help Yi Seul's case. The trial resumed, and for added drama, the now paralyzed creep personally appeared. The prosecution relentlessly questioned Yi Seul, pushing her into a corner. She admitted she loved her boyfriend and didn't want to press charges, despite the beatings, the secret recordings, and the repeated rapes. The pressure from the prosecution and the unexpected appearance of her abusive ex-boyfriend caused Yi Seul to panic. He claimed he wanted a peaceful breakup after discovering her affair, but she pushed him, leading to his injuries and her subsequent lawsuit. He dramatically declared he'd accept being labeled a rapist if it meant her happiness. His manipulative performance swayed the jury. Afterward, he feigned a seizure and collapsed. Yi Seul was distraught and ready to give up. Professor Jong-hoon stood up and announced he would no longer represent her, instead allowing her to defend herself. He encouraged her to treat it as a classroom exercise. With his support, Yi Seul finally found her voice. She spoke of her love for him and how she was only trying to protect herself from him releasing the video. She explained her shame and reluctance to press charges stemmed from the fact that he was her boyfriend, practically her fiancé. The idea of being raped by someone she loved and was about to marry seemed so absurd that she hadn't dared to speak up. She recounted the constant abuse she endured. The court began analyzing a video retrieved from a dashcam on the day of the incident. During the struggle, the creep dropped his phone, but Yi Seul kicked him. She explained she did so to prevent him from picking up his phone and further distributing the video. The prosecution, however, twisted this into an act of intentional assault. The trial was adjourned for further deliberation. Meanwhile, during the trial, Jai Ho successfully bribed reporter Choi. If he agrees to testify against prosecutor Jin, he'll get an exclusive story on the commissioner's attack. After a long, hard day, Mr. Jong-hoon returned home to relax. He barely had a chance to breathe before he was suddenly attacked by the perverted Lee. He tied Mr. Jong-hoon to a chair and was about to inject him with poison. His method seemed very practiced, as if he was staging a suicide. Lee Man-ho resented Mr. Jong-hoon for. He uploaded images of himself attacking the commissioner online. Furthermore, he knew Mr. Jong-hoon knew something about Professor Seo's death. Student Han checked the security cameras in Lee Man-ho's neighborhood and found something unusual. Lee Man-ho had captured the worker at the ankle monitor factory, his accomplice. Han rushed to Professor Yang's house to check on him. He was in the middle of injecting the professor when, luckily, Han arrived just in time. Meanwhile, the members of the jury were still deliberating on the case. Kang Sol's mother kept causing a disturbance, making everyone somewhat annoyed with her. Thanks to Han's timely arrival, Professor Yang hadn't been fully injected with the drugs. Now with a bit of a high, it seemed like he was even more energetic and eager to fight. The police arrested Lee Man-ho and learned that he had his accomplice remove his ankle monitor, rendering the previous alibi in Professor Seo's case useless. He was most likely hired by someone to kill Professor Seo. The teacher and student discussed the matter as they walked to the courthouse to hear the final verdict in the commissioner's son's case. After reviewing the evidence, the court found that the act of causing injury to another person was in self-defense. Therefore, the defendant, Yi Seul, was acquitted. Everyone cheered. Finally, justice was served for that poor girl. Everyone gathered to celebrate the victory, but Yi Seul didn't seem very happy. It's understandable. Whether she won or lost, the psychological trauma she suffered couldn't be forgotten immediately. Prosecutor Jin was drinking and talking with reporter Choi. He blamed the reporter for stabbing him in the back and colluding with Four Eyes Jai Ho. It seems that years ago, the person who leaked information about the case that led to Jai Ho's father's death was someone else. While they were talking, the prosecutor received a call from Professor Yang. He said the real culprit in Professor Seo's case had been caught. As for Kang Sol, the girl with short hair, after experiencing many events and being encouraged by student Han, she decided to tell the truth. She was the one who plagiarized. Her father seemed relieved that his daughter was no longer stubborn. As for her mother, well, she'd never change. She still held on to the hope that her daughter would become a high-ranking judge. And now with this stain on her record, it was all over. The commissioner went to the sauna to lose belly fat and, conveniently, to discuss plans with Prosecutor Jin. The truth that Professor Yang was not the culprit had led to many other consequences. The prosecutor blamed the police for not investigating carefully and blamed Mr. Jong-hoon. The police, in turn, blamed the prosecutor's office for releasing inaccurate details of the case, leading to this outcome. Four Eyes Jai-ho also went to the police because of this matter. Jai-ho told them to come forward and accuse the prosecutor to regain the police's honor. He said they were being called incompetent investigators. Jai-ho also brought up the case of his father, who had self-immolated years ago because of such accusations. Because of his words, the police seemed to be persuaded. The next day, Kang Sol Short Hair went to the university to meet the principal and Miss Kim. She confessed to plagiarizing and asked the school for leniency and forgiveness, for a second chance, and not to be expelled. The perverted Lee Man-ho was intensely interrogated but refused to confess. He even demanded a private lawyer. It seemed there was more to the story, as he was protecting the commissioner's son and hadn't revealed the truth. Four Eyes Jai-ho, after talking with Kang Sol, realized a few things. The commissioner was close friends with the director of a toy company, a competitor of Jai-ho's father's company. So, it wasn't unlikely that the commissioner was involved in leaking details of the case, stirring up public opinion and leading to Jai-ho's father's self-immolation. He took this reasoning to Prosecutor Jin to confront him. Fortunately, Han was there to restrain Jai-ho's impulsive actions. Without concrete evidence, going after the commissioner would be difficult. The next day, the students attended the principal's lecture. She asked them what they thought about defending a bad person. Everyone had different opinions. Kang Sol didn't like defending bad people, especially since she was about to defend the perverted Lee. The following day, Mr. Jong-hoon visited Lee Man-ho in jail and saw many ambulances. Sensing something bad, he rushed inside. Sure enough, Lee Man-ho had been seriously stabbed and was taken to the emergency room. Mr. Jong-hoon hurried to the hospital. Lee Man-ho tried to tell him something, but lost consciousness due to blood loss. It seemed the person behind everything wanted to eliminate him, as he was no longer useful. That person was none other than the commissioner. Meanwhile, at the courthouse, Prosecutor Jin's trial was underway. He was accused of leaking case details before they were verified, leading to the death of the toy company director. Even when charged, Prosecutor Jin remained composed and argued that the criminal code allowed revealing the truth to the public. He even cited the Constitution to circumvent the law. The trial was adjourned after only 5 minutes to review the constitutionality of the law. He truly was a seasoned prosecutor. The scene shifted to the hospital where Lee Man-ho was being treated. To save him, Mr. Jong-hoon decided to donate blood, repaying the favor from when Lee had saved his life. Suddenly, Lee Man-ho convulsed and his heart stopped. Doctors tried to revive him, but it seemed hopeless. Elsewhere, Miss Kim met with Seung to inform him of the upcoming decision. For hacking into the computer and stealing exam questions, Seung would likely be expelled. No law school would accept him. However, respecting their long-standing teacher-student relationship, Miss Kim would help him avoid jail time. The police, upon hearing the news, rushed to the hospital. Professor Yang informed them that Lee Man-ho had died. He was a crucial link in Professor Seo's case, and now with his death, the investigation was stalled. Furious, Mr. Jong-hoon confronted the inmate who had stabbed him in prison and was also responsible for Lee Man-ho's injuries. The inmate claimed it was a fight and he accidentally stabbed Lee Man-ho. Mr. Jong-hoon didn't believe his excuses. As he left, Prosecutor Jin arrived. The inmate told him that the other inmate Char had attacked him first, so it was self-defense. Student Han continued to support Jai-ho in his father's case. The trial would be postponed to review the Constitution, and it turned out the vice principal was the one who originally wrote the law. Han, a male student, upon hearing the news of Lee Man-ho's death, rushed to meet Professor Yan. He showed the professor a photo of Lee Man-ho's son, a photo he had inadvertently captured while visiting Lee Man-ho's house. This meant there had been recent news of the son. The mastermind behind everything had forced Lee Man-ho to kill Professor Seo and Professor Yang, threatening his son's life if he refused. Han suddenly recalled the day his uncle had caused a fatal car accident after leaving a funeral. His uncle hated drunk driving. There had to be a reason for him to drive that day. Han suspected someone else was in the car with Professor Seo that night. The accident occurred in the district of the corrupt commissioner. Professor Jong Hoon, also suspicious of the commissioner, confronted Professor Seo. Professor Yang believed that Seo wasn't a cold-blooded killer who would hit someone and run, unless someone in the car had prevented him from stopping. The commissioner acted nonchalant, feigning ignorance. He flashed back to the day Lee Man-ho had threatened him, handing him a USB drive containing footage of Professor Seo's accident. The commissioner was extremely worried by this threat. Professor Jong Hoon returned to the university and gathered his brightest students. He recounted the events to them. Their task was to find evidence, starting with identifying the attendee of the funeral Professor Seo had gone to on the day of the accident. Han discovered it was the funeral of his uncle's classmate, a doctor. Within the group, the four-eyed student secretly reported everything to Prosecutor Jin, who was in the commissioner's pocket. The commissioner then recalled events from years ago. The truth was revealed. The commissioner was in the car with Professor Seo the night of the accident. They were returning from the funeral, slightly intoxicated. Professor Seo didn't want to drive, but the commissioner, citing an important meeting, insisted and told him to speed up since they were in his district, a deserted development area. The accident happened, killing a young boy crossing the street. Professor Seo was remorseful and wanted to check on the boy, but the commissioner stopped him, saying that if Seo got caught, his career would be ruined. Haunted by those words, Professor Seo lived with the guilt. The next day, Kang Sol-bi, with her short hair, went to school for the final verdict on her plagiarism case. Luckily, the principal dismissed the charges. However, the vice principal, feeling responsible, resigned. Kang Sol-bi offered to help Jai-ho, the four-eyed student, sue Prosecutor Jin. If they won, she asked her father, the vice principal, to return to the university. The police finally agreed to cooperate with Professor Young. They located the doctor's widow and other funeral attendees. However, they all claimed the commissioner and Professor Seo hadn't attended the funeral on the same day. The fact they remembered so clearly after so long suggested the commissioner had interfered and coerced them. Professor Yang returned home with Miss Kim and was surprised to see a young man named James video calling her. James was Lee Man-ho's son, a good son with a bad father. While the students brainstormed to find more evidence related to Professor Seo's case, the commissioner met with the university president to plan a lesson for the students. The day of Prosecutor Jin's public trial for indirectly causing the death of the toy company CEO arrived. Before the trial began, the students launched a preemptive attack, exposing the commissioner's past misdeeds, including spreading false rumors about his election opponent and colluding with prosecutors to leak case details. Yi Seul bravely testified against the commissioner, revealing he had coerced her into falsely accusing Professor Yang of killing Professor Seo. The commissioner was now like a fish on a chopping board, ready to be seasoned and fried. The students discovered their inside informant was the four-eyed student. He was interning with Prosecutor Jin and had been promised a position there after graduation, so he was simply trying to impress his boss. At the trial, Kang Dan unexpectedly appeared via video call from the US. She was now studying law at Harvard and offered her legal expertise to argue the constitutionality of Prosecutor Jin's actions. Kang Sol, seeing her long-lost sister reappear without explanation, was angry and refused to answer her calls. The commissioner and his son were panicking about Yi Seul's lawsuit. They launched a smear campaign against the students, posting articles online exposing their personal information. Four Eye's father was accused of embezzling funds while he was a director at the toy company. Kang Sol's past arrest for school violence was also brought up. One of the commissioner's associates even met with and threatened Kang Sol-bi, telling her to drop everything and spare the vice principal further distress. Yi Seul suffered the most, with hateful notes plastered everywhere after the CH Boy incident. The commissioner was truly ruthless, sparing no one. The four-eyed student, the easiest to bribe, was offered a direct position in the prosecutor's office if he deleted the video exposing the commissioner and issued an apology. The university president, still blindly trusting the commissioner, criticized the students for meddling. The principal and Professor Yang advised him to distance himself from the commissioner before it was too late. Kang Sol, needing money for her mother's rent, asked Kang Sol-bi to compete in a mock trial for her. Winning would give her access to a bank loan. Sympathizing with her roommate's situation, Kang Sol-bi agreed to help. Before dawn, Professor Jong Hoon called a student meeting. They watched a cringeworthy apology video from the commissioner and his son. Boy expressed remorse for his actions, while the commissioner promised to draft legislation on dating violence, even offering to work with Yi Seul on it. Professor Jong Hoon met with the prosecutor to discuss Professor Seo's accident. It seemed the prosecutor was unaware of the commissioner's involvement. Professor Yang presented the funeral registry, proving the commissioner and Professor Seo had attended on the same day. To avoid further manipulation, the prosecutor needed to make a wise choice, as the commissioner's backing was about to crumble. Professor Yang and the students met with the ankle bracelet maker, an accomplice of the stalker Lee. He was also the one who sent the black backpack containing the syringe and pen to Professor Yang. They tried to persuade him to testify against the commissioner. Meanwhile, the four-eyed student secretly recorded the commissioner and his son's fake, staged apology, complete with props. This new evidence would be another humiliating blow to them. Kang Dan unexpectedly flew back to Korea from the US, surprising the students. Kang Dan appeared, radiating an aura of confidence that surpassed her sister's. After greeting the students, she went directly to the commissioner's office and proposed a deal to Professor Yang. Delete the incriminating video, or she would release a video claiming her past accusations against the commissioner were a misunderstanding. Professor Jong Hoon, furious, stormed out. Kang Dan's motive was to force the commissioner to remove the smear campaign against her sister. Kang Sol had gone to jail for defending Kang Dan in a fight, and she didn't want the past resurrected to jeopardize her sister's future. Meanwhile, Han alerted the police, who secretly raided the hideout of the commissioner's hired online trolls. As the commissioner agreed to Kang Dan's terms and ordered the trolls to delete the comments, the police burst in and arrested them red-handed. Professor Yang and Kang Dan dropped the act. It turned out Kang Dan was still in the S. The confident woman was actually Kang Sol. The identical twins had fooled everyone. With the commissioner off guard and trapped, they sprung their final move. He was arrested and taken to the police station for questioning. Professor Jong Hoon and his students' plan had succeeded beyond expectations. The commissioner demanded to see Prosecutor Jin, reminding him they were in this together, and urging him to destroy any remaining evidence. After the meeting, Prosecutor Jin went to the university, where Professor Jong Hoon played him a recording and advised him to let go of the fraying rope. The commissioner held a press conference to defend himself, but was immediately arrested afterward. He was charged with masterminding murder and manipulating online comments. During interrogation, he berated Prosecutor Jin for not destroying the evidence. Jin played him another recording, revealing the commissioner had even suggested murder. Now terrified, Jin sought a way out. Kang Sol diligently prepared for the mock trial to win the loan for her mother. Her roommates rallied, providing her with extensive research materials. Suddenly, the stalker Lee's son disappeared. Miss Kim repeatedly called James but couldn't reach him. Worried, she went to the commissioner, hoping he wasn't involved, but who else could be behind it? Miss Kim agreed to represent the commissioner in court. At Hankook University, Kang Sol continued studying relentlessly. To ease her nerves, Han conducted mock trials with her. They made a good team. The first day of the commissioner's trial arrived. Professor Yang attended as a victim. The first witness, inmate Kai, confessed to stabbing Professor Jong Hoon in prison in exchange for early release. Next, Kang Dan testified. A recording was played of a conversation between her and the commissioner. He demanded she meet him immediately upon returning to Korea, claiming that Professor Yang and her sister constantly provoked him. If angered, he would manipulate public opinion to destroy their reputations, or even worse. Having been fooled once, the commissioner was now wary. He demanded the court verify if it was truly Kang Dan or her twin. On cue, Kang Sol entered, stunning the commissioner. He lost control, even trying to strangle his lawyer. Kang Dan revealed she had located James in the US and gotten him to the hospital just in time. The commissioner was further charged with threats, kidnapping, and unlawful detention. The trial ended in victory. Prosecutor Jin publicly apologized to Professor Yang for the false murder accusation. Everyone then attended Kang Sol's mock trial. The two Kang Sols and Han worked together, determined to win. Regardless of the outcome, they had given it their all. After putting the commissioner behind bars, Kang Dan quietly left Korea. bidding farewell to Kang Sol over the phone and wishing her luck in becoming a lawyer. Finally, the good guys celebrated their victory. Kang Sol's team, though not reaching the semifinals, had triumphed over themselves. A year later, Prosecutor Jin and Jai Ho continued their fight for justice for Jai Ho's father, but with less animosity. Kang Sol excelled in her studies, no longer at the bottom of the class. The vice principal's family, under therapy, was recovering. Professor Jong Hoon, with time on his hands, visited the commissioner in prison. The commissioner had lost his arrogance. Years later, Kang Sol became a renowned lawyer with her own firm, and Han a brilliant prosecutor. Both became Professor Young's trusted allies. Their combined strength would undoubtedly shape the future of legal justice.